Sup everybody, this is Karak with ACG, and today I travel into the terrible, dark, deep unknown to bring you a review that isn't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. What treasure trove of digital delight have I found inside the long-forgotten cave complex of August game releases? Well, it's Strange Brigade by Rebellion, or as I like to call it, Gears of Mummy. It's a co-op third-person shooter with puzzle elements coming August 28th for $50 that asks the question, what if a mysterious military unit was hired to go out and stop an evil queen from returning from the dead and absolutely laying waste to humanity? It would indeed be strange and most likely be the size of a brigade. Let's see how it did, shall we? As always, if you like the video, maybe subscribe. So here's my review for Strange Brigade, Stranger Things Post-Puberty Edition, puzzles where guns are keys, and a world where everyone needs just a little bit of moisturizer. Graphics are up first. So, technically speaking, Strange Brigade doesn't look half bad. It stretches back a bit with its presentation that's sort of one half Tower of Deadly Monsters, which is a game if you don't already have it, you're probably dead inside anyway, and one half the movie The Mummy with less hair replacement needing main characters. Levels are both basic and complex at different times, and sometimes labyrinthian. These complexes are underneath mysterious mountains sometimes where the only way to enter is by performing puzzle elements to get a door to open, which usually involves you shooting the door in time sequences, because as we all know, 2,000 years ago, ancient rulers were the Texans of their time, just saying, man, the only way to get through this door should be to unload buckshot into it. It's SWAT team puzzle solving at its best, and it's not so bad. The game offers this dual presentation that's excellent, almost short novel-style cutscenes with a terrible camera film type of filter showing the characters discussing the plot in the next mission, and then the other side, which is the main gameplay, that does look a bit like Rebellion games prior with a sheen of ancient rubbed off onto it like a reverse Tombstone rubbing. It's really not half bad. Enemies futilely shamble about trying to get their hands on you as you wander around all these different locations, and there's a hint of comedic flair of older games like maybe Time Splitters. Enemy design I actually really liked, and much of that is due to their animation, with mummies shambling towards you able to throw their wrappings into the ground to disrupt you, or massive scorpions that apparently are just smart enough to understand the movie Top Gun, because they're turning and burning constantly, making hitting them a bit more difficult in those tight spaces. Shambling normal zombies, thundering minotaurs that 1 second are basically just bipedal battering rams, and then as you progress, some of them start showing up with doors as shields, just sort of like they went, hey Bob, you using that door? No? Good, here goes, and adding one more strategy that's needed in the firefights, and I really did like their animation for all those special items. Or the fact that as the enemies get closer, headshots become increasingly difficult, not because the AI really jumps up, but because they actually attack wildly, swaying side to side. It's cool to see that attempt made to change things up a bit. They're not juking, they're just, well, really hard to friggin' hit. Sadly, the game is let down by a number of small issues, like once again, the fact that you can basically climb in one area and then you simply can't leap over a friggin' rotten 2x4 in the next. It's like everyone suffers from the worst case to tendinitis humanly possible. And sadly, this does affect the level design a little bit, which runs from okay to good. While most look interesting enough, just as you work through a complex location, you enter a room with a couple doors that really go nowhere, and for some reason an ancient ruler said, man, I really do think the perfect place to store all my magical weapons is behind this door. Now, one thing you may notice almost right away is, yes, the enemy's hit collision is off, so they can indeed somewhat walk through one another, but it has a system in place where they still try to open themselves up for the attack by stepping to the side, and you can attack them in turn. But you are going to find yourself the condiment in an occasional zombie sandwich, where bad guys layer up on one another and look like something from the movie The Thing. Also, when it comes to graphics, I have to mention the viewpoint itself. It's really hit and miss the way the third person works. It does work in the game proper usually, especially when you're firing the guns, but you can't really hip fire any of the items. You always have to aim down the sights. Now that becomes problematic when enemies are up close or spawn right on you, and the game really isn't the best at sensing nearby shots, hitting enemies with bullets aimed right at them and just going past them, because that's sort of how the camera works. It did not like that at all. Now when it comes to performance, the game is running on its own Azure engine, and on the PS4 it's 1080p, on the Pro it's 1440p with a longer draw distance and some more effects, and on the Xbox X it's actually going to run even higher at 1800p. Now on the PC the game offers both DirectX and Vulkan support, which is always nice, with DirectX getting 60 FPS and above at 1440p. That was completely doable with a normal 1080 and easily higher if you sacrifice some of those settings. Also, this is not a game where Ultra should have a warning that says for future PCs only, as a 1080 Ti and a current i7 is able to net you well over 60 FPS with every setting on the highest on 4K. In fact, I was very happy with the performance overall, only seeing a couple dips when explosions and a ton of effects played out on the screen. At least on the test systems, the game ran on a large amount of hardware with just a couple adjustments needed, to perhaps anti-aliasing and so forth. It also comes with a render slider as well, so folks with a much older system are still going to be able to get this working relatively easily. While Strange Brigade may never absolutely stun you with massive vistas and open-ended merciless murdering that, say, an Uncharted game does, the game does very well with what it has, seeing more than 50 to 60 plus characters on screen, all trying to see who can be the first to wear your spine as a top hat, does not get old, and it works quite well in those moments. As a package, I'd say it shows its origins with a couple bits of wonky detection here and there, a couple spots of lackluster design, and a few oddities, but overall, not too shabby. Sound, music, and voice.
No time to rest. Lady Webster has another task to hand out.
So, now the worst is known. Sateki has been set free upon the world.
A terrorist, yeah?
The like of which the world has rarely seen.
So, thankfully, the Strange Brigade is on hand to leap into action once more. What thrilling tales and awe-inspiring adventure awaits them in...
Reloading!
And let's do music first. Percussion heavy and snappy, that's just basically the description here. The game's soundtrack many times plays like everyone in a friggin' marching band said, hey, you know what, I got an idea, let's all snort Adderall and Ritalin and then storm the field with our instruments. It's good for battle, offering a nice percussive background with native sampling throughout, but overall, and after a while, I sort of found myself not really liking it. It's not bad, it's just at times it's quite in your face, and I found myself reaching a little bit for that volume slider. While certainly not poorly done, its style and how it was used in battle, and more importantly, just how much battle you're going to see through the game, it ate away a little bit at my enjoyment. Voice. So I dig this. Not only are the four main protagonists very well represented with goofy characterizations and vocal bits spread around, but the main narrative is at times driven by a faceless observer, announcing all the new locations, new enemies, and just being a sporting good chap. You guys know that I love Deadly Tower Monsters in its presentation, and I certainly do like it here as well. It's like playing your own B-movie, and I really can't say that that's a bad thing. And of course, that brings us to sound. This isn't too shabby, from the restless feed of the Thompson semi-auto, which always sounds a little bit like it was one ejection away from body-rending explosions, to the thick-throated shotguns. Even the little vocalizations that the enemies have whenever they get close to you and want to do the most unfair rendition of Karate Kid and see who's the best around. Inside of a cavern, a good amount of echo and reverb and audio effects are used to subtly change the tone from the other areas where you're terrassing down a valley floor, dropping firebombs behind you and setting off traps because you ran out of bullets. Some pretty good stuff there. Unfortunately, I wasn't a particular fan of the way the game channeled the sound separation. It just wasn't really incredibly informative to me. Many times an enemy spawned in with the game's woeful spawning system I'm going to talk about in a bit, and that meant out of the blue, you're standing against a wall, boom, you get hit without any real warning. Keeping moving and always watching around you is vital, but not only for survival, but sometimes just because the game seems to think like, we won't worry too much about that. In fact, many times I felt like I was fighting it just a little bit to sort of get that setting right, and regardless of using the various different settings on Windows, never really nailed it. And of course, that brings us to gameplay and a bit about the story. Now, Strange Brigade has you and your stalwart companions part of the aforementioned unit, brought into the fray to put down the evil undead queen Sadeki and her merciless legion as she tries to come back to power. This has you and up to 3 friends playing as Archimedes, Gracie, Frank, and Nalunga, as well as another character that's going to be released for free after the game launches. I'm pretty sure I totally botched that last pronunciation. The game starts out with a quick cutscene, and boom, you're jumping in. You're dip diving, running, leaping, shooting, stabbing, and looting enemies as you traverse a number of mysterious locations in the 1930s because, of course, some dumbass decided to release an ancient elder god. In fact, it seems like archaeologists should always go in groups of 2, one to come up with dumb ideas and the other one to say, listen, seriously, what? But that's your job, to go out there, and within seconds, enemies are going to be terrassing out of the ground like erupting sentient bowels, or scorpions are going to try to sting you with poison tails that can quickly roll for evasion, as I said before, or dig into the ground like a goddamn musk tunneling machine. To me, the highlight of Strange Brigade absolutely has to be the use of mixed monsters to keep that strategy from getting too stale. It does a bit, but I'll get to that in a second. In a nice nod towards the mythology, when you die, if you have a resurrection potion, you end up in a sarcophagus and you can basically bounce out. If you don't, and you're playing with somebody else, they can find the sarcophagus and release you. And I like that nod to the fiction instead of being Scotty beamed down like all the other games. Of course, at this time, there wasn't a huge selection of guns, and that is sort of repeated here. You have 10 or more main guns to choose from, as well as sidearms and weapon caches that you can get different special items as well. There's shotguns, Tommy guns, long-distance sniper rifles, and so on. You can also get different explosives like Molotov cocktails, sticky grenades, and clone grenades. To add to that, you can upgrade the guns with these items you find in the game, and that's where the true magic begins, despite it taking a while to actually get one. These can run from lighting enemies on fire, freezing them, breaking their armor, or allowing you to heal up whenever you hit them, and I like that. So you have this tit-for-tat moment where you know you might cause some carnage with a shotgun, but your little machine gun has an armor-breaking amulet on it, and that's not incredibly deep. In fact, it's not really deep at all. But when you consider a lot of titles in this genre going with craftable weapons and so forth, it's sort of fun to just jump into a game where things are pretty much easy to set up and it gets you back to the killing quicker. Of course, what would ancient tomb raiding and mysterious artifact collecting be if we didn't have puzzles to unlock them? And that's the one thing that Strange Brigade has in spades, both good and bad. While there are a number of them, most are somewhat simple affairs, standing on switches, firing in particular areas, then running off to do more as an ancient time tracking device resets it. Others are puzzle doors where you have to restore the ancient power to some snake to get the door to open. I can't say I hated them. In fact, they really do fit into the overall theme of the game, which is sort of channeling those older mummy movies. And I like that about this game. You're rip-roaring across areas all the time. Each level's wicked with various different ways to go, and there's consistent talk from that observer telling your story like a comic book. Really actually quite enjoyable. Unfortunately, it does hit a couple pitfalls on its way to being the greatest four-person, third-person adventure game there is. The first is that the game makes Doom monster closets look like absolutely the highest level of programming. I mean it. They make it look like Mensa-level decision-making. Because in Strange Brigade, dudes just warp in between you and a wall, behind you and a locked door, right in front of you, right beside you, despite there really being no room. In fact, many times they'd spawn behind doors you just sort of shut right in front of them, and they're sitting there moaning like they didn't get a chance to rip your throat out. And sure, I get the idea that they crawl from the ground probably in a way to make you think that they were possibly buried all over the goddamn place, but unless some demonic Johnny Appleseed fruited the earth with millions of dead people, then no. It's infuriating to find a game that really doesn't allow for a number of strategies to play out that it wants you to, because not only is the enemy behind you, but they're right behind you, like Class A felon close, and it really hurts the flow of the game at times, especially with multiple players. Also, the game has you collecting souls to charge up a special attack, but goddamn, if this is special, maybe they should keep it to themselves. This is as bad as one friend who says, hey, want to see something cool, and afterwards you want that 5 seconds back. Like one just allows you to leap forward and punch someone and send them flying, but even in the heavily laden encounters you normally have, it doesn't do much at all above and beyond the normal up-close punch or kick that you have to attack closer enemies. But I gotta say, going in with friends was a blast. You have the campaign, the horde mode, and time attack mode, which all pretty much do what they sound like. I'd suggest you do horde mode after you beat the game, or if you don't plan on doing the campaign, because it does spoil a number of the monsters as you go up in waves. Of course, none of this would matter if the game didn't control well, and it does work pretty well with mouse and keyboard, and of course, controllers there with the ability to turn on aim assist. And of course, that brings us to fun factor. Now, the game is fun for a time and in certain modes. It's not difficult, nor is it incredibly complex. It doesn't have the layered strategies of other games that are somewhat like it, for example, the Vermintide 2s of the world. But it's enjoyable. I wish the roll wasn't the only way to get out of enemies' ways, though, because it can look like recess at a third grade school sometimes, with you and your friends just rolling and spinning and somersaulting around to get away from everyone. But that's pretty much a small quibble. Lastly, I have to say, I wasn't happy when going alone, you actually don't have AI. Now, this hurts the game as the characters are enjoyable to listen to and their little bitty stories, and I would have liked for them to all work together. But instead, you basically go it alone. Now, this compared to many other of today's games in this style seems like a pretty hefty omission. Also, it's going to last you anywhere from 12 plus hours, depending on if you do the horde mode and if you do the time attack mode, and of course, depending on your difficulty. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating system, with rent being replaced by deep sale on PC. This is actually a wait. It's $50. It does have a good 10 to 12 hour campaign, and of course your time attack mode and your horde mode, but unfortunately, it really depends on the presentation. If you're going to play with multiple people, then I think that interaction with those characters and just the way it feels like a team game, that's going to work really well for you and probably be far more enjoyable. And additionally, when it comes down to this game, if you're playing it alone, it really does feel like there's a big omission there, like it doesn't hit as heavily, which is odd when you really look at what this game was going for. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Maybe check out Reddit or Twitter. And always, you can become a patron on the Patreon website, where it helps me give you guys reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. And of course, I buy every single game I review, even if the developers give me a free code, and I give those games to the patrons. Peace out, and enjoy the rest of your week.